I recently wrote on Twitter that I was reminded by job hunting that there was a really thin line between the things I chose to do and the things I wanted to do. It's very similar with often just tiny tweaks. And a fellow asked me about that. He was curious what kind of work I do. He wanted to know, a little more about that, given that what I did was a lot like what I wanted to do. I offered him a Zoom call. He took me up on it.
Yeah, and I'm talking to Matthew. He'd like to ask me some
Yes.
questions about the job hunt, and he's very graciously suggested that we could record it, which sounds like a fantastic idea to me. Yeah, I'm Noah Gibbs, of course. Yeah, Matthew.
Full
Recording sounds
disclosure, the recording was for audio, but I don't mind it.
okay. Well, I can, yeah, I can do either one. If you don't want video, I can
No, it's
blank
fine.
that
It's
right out.
fine. Yeah. It's not necessarily about job hunting, but about the tweet you said is like we have the freedom to choose a little bit what we want to do. We're very lucky, and
Yeah.
also like with open source and things like that. And it is true to some extent, but now I'm sorry, but I'm not. Sometimes I'm mixing a few people that I meet. Were you the one who did the presentation on Rails performance and Ruby performance?
That sounds like me. I do a lot of that
Yay.
kind of thing.
So, and so maybe I'm mistaken, but I think you're doing a lot of benchmarking on Ruby and a bunch of.
Yeah, that's one thing I do.
Okay, that's one thing I do, and that okay, you do, but that's where like I was kind of curious to understand better when you say you can. Well, I guess you do pretty much what you want, what you're interested in. I don't know.
Well, I mean, whatever I can find, kind of what I'm interested in, cross, what people are willing to hire me for. Sometimes that's Ruby performance. Sometimes that's building Rails apps. Right now, at kind of a weird time, I'm in the process of rehabilitating ancient Mud code, Mud like the 1980s era style text games. I mean, that's whatever I can get paid for, right? Is perfectly valid. Yeah, no, I've done a bunch of stuff. I'm also old as programmers go. I've got 30 plus years of experience, depending on where exactly you start measuring. So I've done a bunch of stuff.
Oh yeah.
Like I used to work for Palm, the kind of like that made the Palm pilot. I worked for a company that did these days we call it GPGPU, but where you use a graphics coprocessor as if it were a math coprocessor. Yeah, just a bunch of stuff, right? Like the thing about getting old is you've done a little of everything.
Do you feel that getting older, like you tend to spend a lot more time on small details, and you have a hard time to just like fly through making something or
It depends a lot on what I'm doing. I do get kind of finicky in particular, over the years, and sure, some of that's experience. No, I worked for startups for a long time, and one thing
Okay.
that working for startups and doing an even halfway decent job of it will teach you pretty quickly is you can't be a perfectionist. You can't. You'll tank the entire experiment rapidly if you try to fixate on all the little details. It's
Right.
just not the right way to do it.
Yeah.
I sometimes go the other direction, and if anything, kind of slide by too fast on some details, because if you spend your time trying to do it the way the business people want it done, sometimes you lose a little bit of that engineer gut instinct that everything should be carefully put together. But I mean, full disclosure, my mental model is if I'm doing this perfectly, then I should slide by with too few details or fixate on the perfection thing about equally often.
Right.
Like, I'm
So
going to make
we're
mistakes. I just get
we're
to decide where
slipping
the
the
center of my mistakes
perfectionist
are.
through through like the fast feature basically.
Yeah. I mean, I can't fail to make mistakes. I can just try to decide I can adjust how often I make which type of mistake.
Interesting.
But it's everything, right? Like, you can't decide to do it perfectly, but you can decide what kind of mistakes you usually make.
Right.
Okay.
And do you get paid a lot for open source, like to like contribute back like patches into Ruby or I
Well,
don't know.
so a random open source project, like the median amount to get paid per contribution is going to be zero, right? Because that's how open source
Right.
works. Like,
Right.
the median amount I get paid for open source is the median amount everybody gets paid for open source. It's nothing. I have been really lucky. You probably know that I was Appfolio's Ruby Fellow from, 2016 to 2019, give or take.
Okay.
And so that was a fantastic example of me getting paid a completely unreasonably high amount of money to do pure open source. It was gorgeous. It was wonderful. I loved it. If I hadn't moved to the United Kingdom, I'd still be doing it. But Appfolio didn't want me as an employee in the United Kingdom. So, here I am searching
Okay.
for new job stuff. And that's a great example of the kind of thing where I'm not going to tell everybody how to get that role, because most of the time that role doesn't exist.
Right. You kind of, yeah, it's
Maybe
magic.
Appfolio will wind up hiring another one at some point, and maybe not. And another random company might choose to do that. Heroku has supported some roles kind of like that, and among other things, they hire Mats to do something that, in a lot of ways, is very similar.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, Mats is in a category I'm not, but it's the same general kind of thing, right? Like most kinds of roles, there's sort of the really massively senior, and then there's the various degrees of not Mats.
There's some companies, I don't know why they just want to, maybe like they want to have some names, but like GitHub, for example, I feels like they have multiple people,
Oh
I
yeah,
believe, working mostly on open source. Like
yeah,
they might be doing a few other things, but like
yeah.
they
No, they totally do.
that's amazing. That's awesome. But
Well, and I mean, there's a few good reasons for that. One is, especially as companies are built more and more out of open source, sometimes it's really useful to have somebody who's worked on an open source project and is good with it and can customize it and can build on it,
yep.
in-house on staff, right? And most of the time, if you're doing that, there's a really good reason to want to release that rather than keep it close to the vest. If you have competitors you're really worried about, and what you're doing is a strong competitive advantage, okay, maybe not. But it turns out businesses used to default to never release it, never show that, never. And it turned out it didn't work very well. Because if what you're doing is basically open source, first of all, most open source is not in and of itself a massive competitive advantage. Most of what we're doing is we're just kind of collectively making everything we do cheaper, which is awesome. But the best way to collectively make everything cheaper is just to release pretty much everything, unless there's some really good reason not to. Because if your competitors are using the same little random, thin layer over Kubernetes that you are to deploy your random instances, one, that's not going to be a major competitive advantage. It's just not.
No,
Two,
it's not.
like, given that it's not a big competitive advantage, and most of the people you're dealing with aren't your competitors, they're just, somebody, some company, everybody making it a little cheaper wins. Mostly it's the build on Kubernetes people competing with the not build on Kubernetes people. And it's if you're a clothing retailer, then that's completely irrelevant to your interests. So do it the way that works.
For sure. I actually came across several times like some technology that was built in a house and was not open source, unfortunately.
Yeah.
And you look at it, it's like, this was once beautiful. And unfortunately, it's been there it's unmaintained for 5 years. And it's like, oh my God, this is so sad, but it's
Yeah.
too late. And it's just, now you got to trash it all,
Yeah.
basically.
I mean, all else aside,
Dead.
releasing a thing as open source does tend to make you give it a little bit more scrutiny. And just by itself, getting your engineers to kind of do the equivalent of dressing up for a date and, put their code out there is probably worth it by itself.
Yeah.
Like, that will probably get them to do the things they should be doing internally, but they don't, just by itself. And that's worth something. Like, that's worth something.
Yeah.
But yeah,
I
it
just
also...
wish every company would be understanding that the one I'm currently employed by is have like too many processes, and they want us to do private pull requests on private forks before sending them, and it's really like a legal thing, because what they say that they check, they don't check. So is this, come on.
Yeah, and I mean, all this is rough. Like, legal compliance in particular is one of those things where the amount of paranoia about it is far, far beyond the actual risk. But the only people who are legally allowed to judge that risk are lawyers, and your team almost certainly doesn't have a lawyer on it. And
Yeah.
How old's your
I
kid?
just need to exactly close the door, the exact size of me, because otherwise she cannot sleep. So I'll be back. Sorry about that.
No trouble. I've got kids too. I get it. I have
So
not
you know,
been
it's the Japanese sliding doors,
Ah, okay. Those are fun.
and we just moved into this house about 4 months ago.
Hmm.
Yeah, actually, precisely 4 months ago. And since then, every night, I need to close the door exactly my size.
Yeah. Well,
And
I haven't been called away to help my 3-year-old wipe after going to the little potty. So no, I get it. Like we do what we need to do.
yeah,
Okay, so sorry, you were asking about because I'd said I mostly did the kind of things I liked doing. So the like the open source thing, you can usually find some room to do interesting, useful stuff that you like, the kind of thing you want to do in a lot of jobs, right? There's a pretty good
yeah.
chance that they hired you because your interests line up with what they need, at least to some extent. Like if there's not much overlap there, then you probably could have talked to more companies and found somewhere that was a better fit for you. But there's probably a pretty good
I
place for you.
slip some and I contribute. Always been, but I'm just slightly jealous of those people who just kind of purely do that full time.
I, I, I'm jealous of me working for Appfolio too. I get it. No, it was. I mean, it was kind of ridiculous. But part of it is if you've got good skills and you keep working at it and you keep doing interesting stuff and you talk about what you do, these random opportunities are a lot more likely to just land on your head.
Right.
Like
Uh,
there's a great phrase. I forget who I'm stealing it from. Luck surface area. The idea that you're just kind of spreading out a leaf to the universe and saying this is where luck can land. And a lot more of what I do kind of lives in my luck surface area. Like I didn't go contact Appfolio and say, hey, do you want a Ruby fellow? No, like they decided they wanted a Ruby fellow, and they talked to a lot of people, and I happened to be the one that won the interview, which is darn cool because I know at least like one or two of the people they talk to are really good at what they do.
that's
But
awesome.
I had a chance to do that because I published the book and I was out there and doing all the writing and the coding
Right.
and some of the open source I was doing. I mentioned I'm currently working on a mud project, and it's fantastic. It's so much fun. And the only reason to do that is because I was working on this little random weird tool that like a handful of people ever worked on. And it turned out I built the website for it 10 plus years ago. And so, when a job came up doing that, not that there are very many, not that they happen very often, I was one of the candidates, and there weren't many candidates. Again, it's luck surface area. It's you put it out there. And so if you're patient, and I would understand why a lot of people can't be, but if you can afford to be patient, yeah, sort of putting out these leaves and waiting for raindrops to fall works all right long term, right? I mean, it's who am I? I'm quoting Dan Vassallo when I say portfolio of small bets. He talks a lot about how you do a lot of different things and you do them a little at once, and if something succeeds, then you double down on it. Which is fantastic as a business opportunity. It's not a great way to get into your first high-paying job in programming, but for the kind of people that are, that have their first high-paying
Yeah.
job in programming and they're figuring out what to do next,
Exactly.
you know the phrase, what got you here won't get you there. It's the same kind of thing. It's to get into this, you need to become an okay specialist at something to a decent level. Now, once you've done that, the natural tendency that we all tend to have early in our career is, oh, like specializing got me there. I'm going to double down and specialize even more. And you can, and for some people it even works. But
Yep.
long term, that's only going to get you so far.
And we're not getting younger, so it's like, yeah. Um,
Yeah,
and
not ever again.
some of the open source that I'd like to contribute is actually not directly about my specialty, but more about the environment that I'm using.
Oh yeah,
I've been using Linux for a long, long time, and a big fan of the KDE desktop.
sure.
And I've always wanted to kind of contribute back. And I did like a few small things, but that's just so far away from like, and so now I'm mainly a Ruby developer. So like my
Yeah,
C++ is like
I'm a
years.
big fan of the idea that you should just do a little of everything. I mean,
Yeah,
you're not
that's
going to
what.
successfully predict software trends and what's hot and what's worth a lot of money for the same reason you're not going to predict the stock market or the weather. Like nobody can, so you're not going to.
Right. Yeah, no, exactly. And then that's why I kind of reacted to your tweet because I thought, um, I actually have to make a choice between what is going to give me money versus what I would do if money would not be a. If I get like 3, 4, 5 million dollars, or like I don't need to work for money anymore.
Yeah.
I
But the thing
actually
is,
maybe one might be enough.
most people, if they got to do what they wanted, would do the portfolio of small bets. Not necessarily in
Yeah.
the same way, but like people naturally like to work on a bunch of different stuff. People naturally tend to do
Right.
something for a while and get kind of fed up and switch to something else and move
You'd
back and forth.
switch.
It's not that you'd never go back. You know, of course you go back, but it's you do something else, you do a third thing, and then maybe you go back.
Yeah.
And there's nothing wrong with that. But what you do is you get a foundation built. You know, you get something that you're good enough to. And in my case, I have a savings, and so my effective foundation at this point is not my career, but my savings. I mean, I've also got a career, but the nice thing about a savings is it's not money I'm earning; it's money I've already earned. It's sitting there. It's nice. And
Right.
later in your career, that should be the right answer. Is that later in your career you've got a savings. Earlier in your career, you've got a job that will get you a savings. And yeah, totally. I mean, you know, you put on your own mask before you do anything else, not just your kid's mask before you do anything else. But once you've got the mask in place, suddenly your options open up. And that's a lot of it, is you put on your mask and then your options are open. If your kid needs a mask, then you put the kid's mask on. But at some point, you know, you're not in the middle of a plane crash. And at some point,
Yep.
you've got your mask on and your stuff's in decent shape and you could just continue working like this. And I'm not going to tell you how many hours a week to work. I mean, tell you broadly, not just you personally, how many hours a week to work. You know, maybe you start doing outside and, you know, investing on other bets pretty rapidly. Maybe you take a while to do it, whatever works for you.
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, once you've done that, if you've done a bunch of stuff, suddenly it gets a lot easier to do interesting things.
Yeah, it's great insight. And blogging more, like you said, like spreading your wisdom.
Well, put it, yeah. I mean, the book was probably the biggest thing I did that way. The blogging helps. I did a lot of blogging related to it. But the big thing about the book, the big reason it was interesting, was not writing the book. I mean, writing the book was nice, and it's sort of nice to be able to say I've done it. But the interesting thing is, if you pick a weird topic, and you should, I mean, you know, if you're writing a book, you should have something to say. You should have some weird
Right.
topic. Say you do that. 5 years later, if you've done an even okay, sort of decent job of putting that out there, 5 years later, everybody who's had a really weird question about that for the intervening 5 years has turned around and come to you with it, which means you've seen 5 years of the weirdest questions everybody has on that topic. Like, if you want to build your own rack framework and do stuff with like weird rack frameworks, there are a handful of people in the world that are the right person to come to, and I'm one of them, which means I got a lot of those weird questions. Which is cool. I mean, I wasn't a massive expert on that when I started writing the book, but writing the book made me better, and getting all those questions made me a lot better. You know, Gemma Isroff is in the middle of...
I need to consider writing a book now.
Even if you don't write a book, get a topic.
Right.
Right? It turns out that the early stages of writing a book and the early stages of getting a topic are the exact same stages. Before you write a book, start writing blog posts. Make sure somebody cares about the topic. And if your blog post gets you a couple of weird questions, fantastic. That means you have found a vein of weird questions that you can mine.
I see. Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool.
Gemma Isroff is writing a book about garbage collection. And I mean, I don't know for sure that she's getting a lot of weird questions about Ruby garbage collection. I certainly hope she is. But I do know that if you had weird questions about Ruby garbage collection right now, you would turn around and ask Gemma Isroff.
Right. That's a good call. Yeah, it's find your niche. So you were sorry, I'm changing subject, but you were
please.
in Fukuoka early 2019, right?
Yeah, just for Ruby Kaigi.
2019.
Yeah, I was there for a few weeks. In early 2019, we decided, my family and I, that we were going to leave the Bay Area, and so we sold the house, put everything in storage. I'd already been speaking at various Ruby conferences, but I applied to a lot of worldwide Ruby conferences, and we were living in California. We didn't know where we were going to go, and we just booked Airbnbs for the different conferences. It's like, these conferences all said yes. Great, we'll just, as soon as one conference finishes, we'll go to the place where the next conference is, and we'll live there for a few weeks.
Wow.
Yeah, it was good.
That's a nice trip.
It is.
And very good timing before COVID.
Yeah, the timing was perfect. We settled down permanently in Scotland on purpose just a little before lockdown.
It's all right. I did how many conference, now I can settle down. Yeah, sounds good.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and tried different countries. Like there were a bunch of places we wanted to try living. And it turned out once we'd been in a bunch of different places, the kids immediately decided, you know what? We want somewhere primarily English speaking. Like we went to
Okay.
Malaysia, we went to Japan, we went to a few places. And they basically went, nope, nope, primarily English speaking. And so suddenly our focus narrowed a lot. But we wouldn't have known that until if we like lived somewhere that wasn't.
Yeah. Got to bring them before they decide.
Well, and that was the plan. Is we were sort of browsing countries.
Right. It's pretty hard to live here without any Japanese. Like if you, my wife is Japanese, so that
That helps.
otherwise, I, yeah,
Yeah, I speak
that'd
like
be
this much, but
okay.
having me in your wife's place, having me as the one in the family that can speak Japanese and I can speak that much Japanese, like, yeah, no, it was rough.
It gets hard, like the paperwork for the school and all like and wow, anything
Yeah.
you want to do, like it's always in Japanese. So
Luckily, my wife has a teaching certificate, and so we homeschooled. But even the homeschooling is rough when you go to another country. Like our oldest has actually started going to regular school because moving to a country where you don't know anybody and homeschooling means you're stuck in the house with your family the entire time, and none of you know anybody, and so.
yeah, I don't know. Actually, I don't have that many questions. I mostly wanted to react on this. Yeah, I'm pretty lucky myself, actually.
It's a great time to be a programmer.
Trying to be more lucky.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it, yeah, is when you do things, find a way to tell the world you did it. The other thing that I've gotten good mileage out of is a portfolio. I don't know. Have you seen my portfolio?
I need to. No, I don't. I need to.
Hang on a second.
That,
There we go. You probably don't want to look through the whole thing there, but I think all programmers should have a portfolio. Like apparently the bootcamp people get told hard, portfolio, 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 and I'm thrilled to hear it. Like I've actually seen advice from people saying, if you're not going to have much in your portfolio, don't even bother to the bootcamp people, because the portfolio advice is so common that some people are saying, okay, you don't need it that much, which is thrilling because people my age almost never have portfolios, and it's incredibly hard to get them to do it.
right.
So I'm glad that's changing. That's a fantastic thing to have change.
No, it's great. I realize it's even better than a resume.
Yeah.
You basically list every projects you worked on. Some of them sometimes I have they're slightly private. I don't know how. I guess you can ask permission, but no, I guess not.
It depends.
And with some pictures, it's pretty awesome.
Yeah.
It's
Well,
also quite simple.
there's a pretty good chance that even private things, you can say something about them, or
Yeah,
at worst, you can say
exactly.
something like, details about private projects available on request. You can indicate that something like that exists. But yeah, a lot of it is when you do stuff for you, go out and make it loud in the world, because there are probably people who do incredibly cool things for the U.S. Department of Defense, and a lot of them just can't talk about any of the specifics of those. And yeah, they're in a worse place than we are, but they're in an especially bad place if they spend all their time on their work projects, right? And so that's a lot of it. They're trading their luck surface area for whatever it is they get from the job at the DoD for working on cool stuff or working on things they want to work on, or just straight up money. But they've decided to trade that away. And if you haven't, then fantastic. You can take advantage of this thing that you haven't sold. Your right to talk about your work.
This didn't get into deaf here. You might have noticed I'm not native English, so sometimes like what I say is
I can hear a little bit of an accent, but I have one too. I can only say so much.
But yeah, no, it's very inspiring actually, and that's a part that I've been lacking or not focusing enough.
When I say put your work out there, the thing is, it would be easy to hear that as do useful stuff, do things people care about, do stuff that makes you sound interesting. But like, if you check my portfolio there, you're going to see a bunch of stuff like a little text game thing. Like I thought Twine was kind of cool, and so I put together a little text game. Nobody's going to directly hire me for that. They're just not, and I'm cool with that. And it turns out I'm working on a MUD at the moment. I didn't think anybody hired me for that either. Do random stuff, do stuff that's cool. Like I haven't started putting like my drawings, like literal, like with a pen and paper,
Okay.
into there because that probably doesn't matter. But at some point, I'll put on my big boy panties and decide that since I'm doing a cool thing, the fact that I can draw stuff probably belongs on the portfolio somewhere, just like one little entry. And it's not because the drawing is so important. It's because it doesn't have to be important to go on the skills constellation. The interesting thing that you're doing here is, so my portfolio, you've probably seen, has the little tags at the top. And so if somebody cares about a particular topic, that's great. They can click on it. But if they don't care, what you're really doing, again, is trying to increase your luck surface area. I can put together presentations and I can draw my own pictures for the presentations. That's the kind of thing that belongs on my portfolio. It just, in some way, like it does. And it's not that I'm fantastic. It's that, again, you don't have to be fantastic. It's that I can imagine an opportunity like that landing somewhere, and so I'm going to put out a little leaf that may catch that raindrop.
Yeah, it's a good idea. You tag for full-time as well, so we can see the things that you were working full-time versus the smaller projects.
Yeah, I do a decent job of
the negative tag of it.
There's not.
You haven't put part-time. I want to see all the part-time stuff.
I can't remember if there's still a personal tag. There was for a while. Personal is a weird one, though, because it turns out that once that leaf catches a raindrop, once one of your interests turns into something that made some money, suddenly it's weirder to decide if it's an amateur deal or not. And so a few of these have sort of changed tags over the years, because once I get paid for that category, it feels more like it. I don't know. That stays squishy.
Cool. Well, that's awesome. If you have a call in just 10 minutes, I think I'll let you cool off in between.
Sounds good. Yeah, I was gonna disappear on you pretty soon here. So yeah, but great to talk to you, and thanks for asking. Yeah,
Thank you.
I mean, I'm always happy to talk to people. For if anybody actually watches this, I'm happy to talk to you. It turns out he could just message me on Twitter and say, hey, and ask a question, and all of you could too. To
you
put
think
another
you're gonna
there.
Share in its entirety, or are you gonna put it on your website? Do you know how you're gonna share?
I'll probably stick it in a blog post, stuff where I don't know where it goes. Like, people by and large don't look at my blog much, and so you have to go looking for it to find it. And so it turns out it's a great place to just put random, almost junk drawer stuff, right? And so I've had a few people ask me employment questions, and maybe I record a video, or I write down a thing and stick it into a blog post, or I just kind of take notes on it. And it's not ever going to be a big deal, but again, it's another little leaf that can catch a raindrop.
It's interesting because it's going to be the first time that people will be like watching me, and I was no preparation. So
sometimes that's exactly what people want.
Yeah. All
All right, cool. Well, thank you very much, and I will stop the recording.